30 details kids today will never know about life in the 50s and 60s. Life has changed in ways we can hardly imagine. The habits, values, and daily adventures of the 1950s and 1960s now seem like stories from another world. Memories cherished but never truly forgotten. So let's look back at what life was really like in this era, which today's generation may never fully understand. People dressed up when they left the house. The concept of fashion and how people dressed when leaving the house in this decade was completely different from what we see today. No one, whether a child or an adult, would dare to leave the house without being neatly and properly dressed. For men, the most familiar image on the street was a dapper suit, a neatly tied tie, and a fashionable hat carefully worn. Women always wore dresses, whether going to the market, to work, or meeting friends. Think of billowing full skirts, elegant pencil skirts, all intentionally coordinated. Even children wouldn't wear pajamas, sportswear, or flip-flops to the grocery store, supermarket, or other public places. That was considered impolite and completely unacceptable. While they might be more comfortable at home in casual clothes, when stepping outside, everyone wanted to look neat and respectable. Radio was the main source of home entertainment. In a world without the internet, without social media, and where TV was still a luxury, the large radio in the living room was the heart of all family entertainment. Close your eyes and imagine the cozy scene every evening in the 1950s. The whole family gathered together, eyes fixed on the radio, listening to every story, every piece of music being broadcast. It was a time when radio programs like The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, The Lone Ranger, or The Adventures of Superman became an indispensable part of daily life. For children, following the latest episodes of these shows was a highly anticipated event. Each story was told through voices, music, and sound effects, stimulating the listener's imagination to the fullest. Early TVs had small black and white screens. While today, every family might own multiple large high-definition TVs. In the 1950s, owning a TV was a major event. TVs back then were very rudimentary with tiny black and white screens. There was no fiber optic cable, no hundreds of channels to choose from, and no Netflix or YouTube to watch anything you wanted at any time. Program choices were very limited, but for children and adults alike, it was still the coolest thing they'd ever seen. Despite the limitations, shows like Walt Disney's Disneyland, later The Wonderful World of Disney, had a strange appeal. The whole family would gather around that small TV every week, eagerly awaiting new episodes. These early TV shows were often broadcast in segments over several weeks, creating anticipation, a fixed weekly event for every family. The popularity of these Disney shows created a real craze, such as the coonskin cap craze that spread across America. Teaching politeness and manners. In the 1950s, parenting carried a different and much stricter meaning than it does today. Parents back then often married quite young, right after high school, and they brought deep traditional values into their children's education. Politeness and manners were not suggestions, but fundamental lessons, taught and practiced from a very young age. The most emphasized core value was respect for elders. This was demonstrated through specific actions, seemingly simple but extremely important. Children always had to say yes ma'am or no sir when speaking to older adults, showing absolute respect. And an unbreakable rule at the dinner table was to ask permission before leaving, showing respect for the meal and those sharing it. Lower high school graduation rates and focus on trades. The 1950s was an era where educational paths and career orientations were very different from what we see today. For public school students, the expectation was not that everyone had to go to college. In fact, high school graduation rates were significantly lower because many young people chose to drop out to work as teenagers. This was especially common in rural areas where the demand for young labor was high and job opportunities came early. Completing high school was not considered a mandatory ticket to success. Instead, society focused more on crafts and technical professions. Access to higher education was also much less than now. However, if a person decided to attend college, the costs were often more affordable, and many students could work their way through school. Do you have any special memories related to the above? Share your feelings in the comments below. Parents' reaction to rock and roll music. The emergence of rock and roll music was not just a musical phenomenon, but also a major shock to the parent generation. The younger generation, especially teenagers, were crazy about these new, powerful, and rebellious melodies. Elvis Presley with his sensual, hip-swaying dances and Chuck Berry with his energetic electric guitar riffs became new icons, captivating millions of hearts. But for parents, these performances and music were considered excessive. The big band era with its smooth, polite tunes officially ended when radio stations began playing what some called the devil's music. While teenagers couldn't get enough, parents did everything they could to prevent their children from listening, watching, or dancing to rock and roll. They feared that this music would corrupt their children, making them rebellious, disrespectful, and breaking good traditional values. Board games were the main indoor entertainment. In an era without smartphones, tablets, or other electronic devices to grab attention, children in the 1950s and 1960s found joy in simple but intellectually stimulating games. Board games. Instead of staring at screens, they would be busy indoors with games like Monopoly, Mousetrap, or The Game of Life. Many families even dedicated one evening a week to playing games together, turning it into a true game night. Do you remember the scene? The lively laughter, the small, fun debates about the rules, and the anxious moments waiting for the results. Interestingly, board games back then were quite affordable. For less than $2, you could buy a game from famous manufacturers like Parker Brothers or Milton Bradley, but the value they brought was much greater. More importantly, they created joyful laughter and unforgettable bonding moments among family members. Self-organized outdoor games. When house doors opened, a world of freedom and creativity awaited children in the 1950s and 1960s. Unlike today, where children are often enveloped by organized sports tightly managed by adults back then, children devised creative ways to pass the time outdoors themselves. They decided what to play, where, and when. Going back to this time, you would be one of the groups of children gathered on a quiet street or in a park, discussing, debating, and finally agreeing on a game. Then they would elect their own captains to divide teams, ensuring fairness and healthy competition. The focus of these games was not on becoming the best athlete, winning many cups or medals. It was about the joy of playing, developing friendships, learning teamwork, resolving conflicts, and taking responsibility. The absence of adult pressure or performance goals allowed children the freedom to explore, experiment, and learn from their own experiences. Burns, scratches, or scars on children were not a cause for concern, but even considered badges of honor. The Howdy Doody Show on TV. If you were lucky enough to have a new TV in the 1950s, one of the shows almost all children couldn't miss was The Howdy Doody Show. This entertainment program quickly became a cultural phenomenon, shaping the childhood of an entire generation. Produced by NBC, this show was a pioneer in children's programming. What was special about The Howdy Doody Show was its combination of puppets and real human characters. Buffalo Bob, the friendly host, along with Clarabelle the Clown, a humorous character with a unique personality, who only communicated by honking or not speaking at all, became familiar and beloved faces. The show also had a peanut gallery, a dedicated area for children to watch live in the studio. When the show's familiar opening began with the phrase, "It's Howdy Doody time," all the children in the family would rush into the living room, eagerly awaiting new adventures of Howdy Doody and his friends. Jell-O, gelatin, was used as a complete meal. Today, when we mention Jell-O, we usually think of a sweet, colorful dessert, often served after meals or at light parties. But Jell-O had a completely different role in family meals in the 1960s. At that time, mothers seemed to have an intense passion for experimenting with putting anything into Jell-O. If you happen to find a cookbook from the 1960s, you can almost certainly find a recipe for a strange gelatin mold containing deli meats, vegetables, or even fish. The Jell-O mold would be bright green or red, but inside would be diced carrots, celery, or ham, all congealed into a meal gelatin block. This idea might seem bizarre, but back then it was considered a creative way to enrich meals that were incredibly simple to prepare. Among all the details above, which one surprised you the most and reminded you of your childhood? Share it in the comments below. No backpacks for carrying books to school. Another contrasting image is going to school without a school bag. Instead, children had to carry all their textbooks, folders, and papers by hand, or tucked under their arm. Imagine thick, heavy books along with notebooks and important papers, all clutched in their arms, especially on hot or rainy days. If you were a student, you certainly can't miss this school experience. Most children walk to school, sometimes quite long distances. Therefore, having to carry heavy loads by hand was a daily challenge. Books and papers could slip, fall, or get wet if it rained. It wasn't until the 1970s that backpacks began to become popular and gradually replaced this traditional way of carrying books. Public service announcements, PSAs in cartoons. In the 1960s in the US, there were special messages called Public Service Announcements, PSAs. Interestingly, these PSAs were often aired during TV cartoon shows, where children spent most of their viewing time. These PSAs were like short but important reminders for children. One of the most famous examples, which has stayed with generations, was about wildfire prevention. Featuring Smokey Bear, a bear wearing jeans and a forest ranger hat, saying the classic slogan, "Only you can prevent forest fires." This message became a direct call to action for every child, instilling in their minds a sense of responsibility towards the environment. The main goal was to teach children about environmental protection, traffic safety, health, and most importantly, civic responsibility. Sunday drives by car. It's hard to believe there was an era years ago when long car trips were not an obsession with traffic jams or fuel costs, but a most anticipated form of family entertainment. In the 1960s, gas prices were low and the automotive industry was booming, producing a wide range of affordable cars, making it easy for many American families to own one. Along with that was the significant development of road infrastructure. The nation was actively expanding and building miles of new highways, especially the interstate highway system, which began to form in the 1950s. In this context, the Sunday drive became a distinctive cultural feature. This was a leisurely, unhurried trip where families explored the countryside, enjoyed scenic views, or visited state parks and beaches for relaxation. In addition, attending drive-in theaters was also a favorite entertainment option, where families could watch movies from the comfort of their cars at an affordable cost. Along popular routes, new gas stations, restaurants, and motels like Holiday Inn, Howard Johnson's and Stauffer's began to appear, turning mere stops into an indispensable part of the trip, creating unforgettable memories. The combination of cheap gas, widespread car accessibility, and a developing road network transformed family car trips into an unforgettable part of life. Phone numbers with named exchanges. Let's go back in time to an era when phone numbers were not just a dry sequence of digits, but carried a suggestive name, a local hallmark. Previously, phone numbers did not start with digits, but with names. This system was called named exchanges, starting in the 1930s and lasting until the 1960s. How it worked was quite unique. The first two letters of the exchange name would correspond to the first two digits on the phone keypad. For example, your phone number might start with GRANITE or PENNSYLVANIA. It created a sense of familiarity and natural geographical identification. By the 1960s, the phone company switched to an all-digit system, eliminating these named prefixes. This change met with opposition from some groups, such as the Anti-Digit Dialing League in San Francisco, who argued that it dehumanized the telephone system. They wanted to keep the fun names instead of just soulless numbers. Party lines. Before every household had its own phone line as today, a common phenomenon, especially in rural areas and small towns in the mid-20th century, was shared telephone lines or party lines. Instead of each house having an independent line, multiple houses in the same area shared one phone line. This meant that if one person on the line was making a call, that line would be busy for everyone else sharing it. To distinguish which house a call was for, each house had a special ring pattern. For example, your house might have a 2 short, 1 long ring, while your neighbors might be 1 long, 2 short. Party lines were an early form of phone group chat, a unique type of community communication. It demonstrated the lack of telecommunications infrastructure, but also simultaneously created a bond, or sometimes annoyance, within the community. Are you still with us on this nostalgic journey? Leave a yes in the comment section to let us know you're enjoying it. Manual typewriter ribbon. In a world without personal computers or laser printers, the main tool for creating professional text documents was the manual typewriter. In the 1960s, these machines were indispensable in offices, schools, and even homes. And accompanying them was something today's children would never understand: the typewriter ribbon. This ribbon was like an ink cartridge for today's printers. It was a long fabric strip, saturated with ink that ran through the machine's typing mechanism. When you pressed a key, the type bar would strike the ribbon, transferring ink to the paper, forming the letter. When the ink ran out, you had to change them. And changing ribbons was not as simple or clean as changing a printer cartridge today. It was a process that could be very messy. You had to be careful not to get ink on your hands or clothes. Many people ended up with fingers covered in black ink after changing ribbons. This is completely different from typing on our clean, modern computer keyboards today. Using paper maps and printed directions for navigation. In the days before Google Maps, Waze, or any other digital map app on our smartphones, finding your way was an art and required creativity. In the 1960s, when technology was not as developed as it is now, Americans had to rely on various methods to find their way. The most common means were large paper maps. Reading maps was not simple. It required navigational skills, the ability to recognize symbols, and a clear understanding of scale. People had to trace each road and turn on that map themselves. Additionally, they relied on printed directions from services like MapQuest, which later developed, or even advice from friendly locals. Asking for directions was not uncommon. It was a natural way to interact and get help from the community. Carbon paper for making copies. Before photocopiers became a familiar device in every office and home, people used a clever invention to make copies of documents. Carbon paper. This was like a type of magic paper in its time. The way carbon paper worked was quite simple yet effective. You would place your original document on top, then place a sheet of carbon paper in between, and finally a blank white sheet of paper at the bottom. When you wrote or typed on the original paper on top, pressure from the pen or the typewriter's type bar would transfer ink from the carbon paper onto the white paper below, creating an instant copy. Carbon paper was widely used in offices to create multiple copies of the same document, at home to keep copies of important letters, and almost anywhere a copy was needed. Although not as fast or convenient as modern photocopiers, carbon paper still did the job well when you needed a copy of something important. TV programs ended. Broadcast at night. In a world full of 24/7 streaming options and hundreds of readily available TV channels, the concept of television ending its broadcast at night would surely surprise children today. When a long day of television programming concluded, TV stations would sign off or end broadcast for the night. That meant no more programs would air until the next day. Imagine, no reruns, no continuous news channels, and certainly no on-demand viewing. Instead, TV stations would play the national anthem, or sometimes just a test pattern, a static image with lines and colors for technicians to check the signal. These signals were meant to let everyone know it was time to say goodnight. Using encyclopedias for research. In the 1960s, when children wanted to learn about something, they didn't have the luxury of quick online searches. Instead, they used huge sets of books called encyclopedias. Recall those thick printed sets, arranged alphabetically, each volume packed with facts and information about everything imaginable. From the history of ancient civilizations to rare animals, from great scientific discoveries to the lives of famous composers, it was all contained within these massive sets of books. Did you want to know about the moon landing or the Beatles? You would have to flip through pages, find the correct topic. Unlike the speed of clicking today, using encyclopedias required time and patience. Children would have to search for the topic they needed, then skim through pages until they found the relevant article. It wasn't just about finding information, but also a hands-on learning adventure, requiring focus and the ability to analyze information. adding machines with paper rolls. In offices in the 1960s, before electronic calculators became common, complex calculations were performed on bulky but efficient machines, adding machines with paper rolls. These machines seemed primitive compared to modern calculators, but they were the best tools available for processing numbers. Every office had a large machine with many number buttons and a lever or crank. What was special about them was that they had no digital display or ability to save work. Instead, when you entered numbers and performed calculations, all the numbers and results would appear on a long roll of paper like an endless receipt. If you made a mistake, there was no delete or undo button. You had to start over. This required high accuracy and the ability to concentrate on each calculation. Office workers had to carefully double-check every number to ensure no errors. Pull-tab soda cans. In the early 1960s, opening a soda can was a different experience than it is now. Instead of the attached stay-on tab we have today, soda cans back then had a detachable pull tab. These tabs were very easy to open. You just had to pull hard, and the tab would separate from the can. However, this convenience caused a big problem: litter. The entire tab portion would detach from the can, and people often carelessly discarded it on the ground. This created a large amount of trash everywhere, on streets, in parks, and even on beaches and sparkling sand with thousands of tiny, sharp metal tabs. This environmental problem became increasingly severe, and eventually people began to realize its harmful effects. This prompted the introduction of a new design for soda cans, the stay-on tab. This improved design significantly reduced the amount of litter, as the tab no longer detached and usually remained attached to the can. Filmstrip projectors in schools. In a classroom in the 1960s, before digital projectors and PowerPoint presentations, teachers had a fascinating tool to illustrate lessons: the Filmstrip projector. This was a useful teaching tool and was considered the most advanced technology of its time. A Filmstrip projector was like a simpler version of a movie projector. The Filmstrip itself was a long, narrow strip of film containing a series of sequential images. Each frame on the Filmstrip contained an image related to the lesson, and sometimes there were captions or text to further explain the content. The teacher would manually advance the Filmstrip one frame at a time, explaining the content as each new image appeared on the screen. It was a much slower process than today's flexible and fast digital presentations. However, at the time, it was an effective way to capture students' attention and present information as visually as possible. The milkman's daily delivery. Let's go back to a time when convenience didn't come from ordering via an app or a 24/7 supermarket, but from a friendly delivery person arriving at your doorstep every day. A common sight in neighborhoods across America in the 1960s was the milkman. This service involved delivering fresh milk directly to people's doors in sturdy glass bottles. The milkman had a clockwork schedule, ensuring that families would wake up to find their milk already left outside their door. The milk bottles were often placed in a designated milk box, helping to keep the milk cold until residents brought it inside. This daily tradition provided households with a convenient and reliable source of fresh milk, eliminating the need for frequent trips to the store. What was special was that these glass bottles were not only environmentally friendly but also reusable. The milkman would collect the empty bottles from the previous day for reuse, creating a sustainable system in its own way. Although this charming service has largely disappeared in modern times, memories of daily milk deliveries remain a nostalgic reminder of a simpler time when an essential daily item was thoughtfully delivered right to your door. Letter, writing as a primary means of communication. In the age of instant messages, emails, and video calls, the idea of letter writing as a primary means of communication might seem alien to children today. But in the 1960s, letter writing was a common and important way to communicate, especially among young people. Instead of sending a message with just a tap on a phone, people would sit down with a pen and paper to express their thoughts and feelings. This was not just a means of conveying information, but also a way of connecting genuinely and personally with friends and family. Each letter was a small work of art, written with thought and emotion. To write a letter, you needed writing paper, an envelope, and a stamp. Choosing words, writing carefully, addressing the envelope, and mailing the letter required time and effort. And then, waiting for a reply added an element of suspense and anticipation to the communication. The feeling of opening an envelope and reading every handwritten line from a loved one was an experience incomparable to reading a message on a screen. Playing vinyl records at different speeds. Record players had a special feature. You could change the rotation speed of the record to match each type of music. Vinyl records commonly had three popular speeds: 33, 45, and 78 revolutions per minute, RPM. Each speed was like a secret code, telling the record player how fast to spin the record. 33 RPM, also known as LP long play, was typically used for full-length albums with many songs per side. 45 RPM was usually for singles, often with just one hit song on side A and a B-side track. These records often had a larger center hole and required a special adapter to place on the record player's spindle. 78 RPM was for older, more vintage records, typically from previous decades. To ensure the music played in the correct pitch and tempo, you had to select the right speed for the type of record you were listening to. It was like a DJ's secret trick. If you chose the wrong speed, the vocals would be distorted and the music would sound oddly fast or slow. Soda fountains. Soda fountains were considered bustling social hubs where friends gathered, stories were shared, and memories were made. These charming spots, often found in drugstores or diners, had a special allure. Long, gleaming soda counters with sparkling stools, and behind them a soda jerk, a professional soda dispenser, artfully creating sodas. Soda fountains offered a wide variety of flavored syrups, and you could customize your drink as you wished: cherry vanilla, a special malt, or a traditional egg cream. Beyond refreshing drinks, these soda fountains became beloved meeting places. Friends would come here to chat, couples would share a Sunday, and the whole community would bond over shared experiences. It was where first dates happened, important conversations took place, and moments of relaxation after school or work were enjoyed. Using a hose to wash the driveway. On a sunny afternoon in the 1960s, using a hose to wash the driveway was a very common practice that many people did without much thought. People would grab a hose, turn on the water, and spray away dust, leaves, and stains from the driveway, which seemed like a simple and effective way to keep the outdoor space clean. This process usually involved using a strong stream of water to wash away everything clinging to the surface. Water was used freely, sometimes wastefully. However, times have changed, and with that, our understanding of water conservation. Today, using a hose indiscriminately to wash driveways is often discouraged due to concerns about wasting water resources. Collecting green stamps. In the 1960s, there was an interesting and unique hobby that children today would certainly not understand: collecting green stamps. These were not postage stamps with famous people or historical sites, but special stamps you could receive when shopping. The idea was quite unique, especially when compared to the digital reward programs we use today. When people shopped at certain stores, mainly supermarkets and department stores, they would be given these green stamps as a reward or bonus for each purchase. You would collect these stamps, then redeem them for all sorts of attractive merchandise like household items, electronics, or even furniture. Pogo stick as a popular toy. While children today are engrossed by complex video games and high-tech toys, in the 1960s there was a simple yet extremely popular toy that captivated the imagination of children throughout neighborhoods: the pogo stick. At first glance, the pogo stick seemed rudimentary, but it brought endless joy to children back then. Its structure was quite simple: a sturdy metal pole, footrests, and a spring at the bottom. Children would jump on, hold tight to the handles, and then bounce up and down with great exhilaration. What made the pogo stick fun was the challenge of mastering the rhythm and balance needed to keep bouncing without falling. Children would spend hours outdoors practicing moves with the pogo stick, trying to jump higher, performing more complex tricks to outdo each other. Do you remember anything else from the 50s and 60s that we missed? Share your story, and let's reminisce about a bygone era. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Back to Yesterday to discover more beautiful memories from the past. Thank you for watching until this moment. See you on the next journey.